Hello, and welcome to the Essentially Explained podcast for a rather different introduction to what we normally have. Basically, this is just a quick, video inserted into this podcast from me, just to say why this video is a little bit late, because obviously it's about the budget, which was released last Wednesday. Basically, it's because of uni, I've just been busy, but hopefully it should still provide some insight and obviously some interesting views and opinions from Dan and I. And obviously if you disagree or agree with any of those comments, then leave them down below. But yeah, guys, I think without further ado, I will hand myself over to, well, my past self. Hello and welcome back to the Essentially Explained podcast, where today we're talking about the Chancellor's new budget that he released yesterday, I believe, in the House of Commons. We're sort of going to be analysing the transcript we've got here, going through the main points, sort of giving our view as an economist, whether we think the budget is a good thing, whether it goes far enough in certain key areas. As always, I am joined by Mr. Dan Marks. And Dan, how are you doing on this fine Friday evening?
It is a fine Friday, isn't it? It's budget day. Well, it's not budget day now. So it's not actually budget. We should really have recorded this on budget day. There'd be more excitement about it. Yeah. Yes, we're the only two people that get excited about the budget.
Yeah, on a Friday evening as well.
Yeah, on a Friday evening as well. Martin, it was actually released on the 3rd of March. Come on, that was 2 days ago. Wednesday is always budget day.
I must apologise.
He doesn't. I mean, this is the most. I mean, his favourite topic in economics is balance of payments. What else do you need to know? That tells you everything.
It's my favourite subject in life, just full stop.
He thinks that double entry bookkeeping is a form of foreplay.
I mean, come on, who wouldn't find that sexy? But yeah, so we, as you can probably see on the screen, we've got the transcript in front of us. We'll sort of try and skip past the bits where he's going, just doing some, normal, like,
political rap,
political, in simple terms, basically. So if I just, hopefully you guys should still be able to see this if I switch over to this screen. Just make sure I'm still recording, because we've had some issues with recording recently. So, as you can see here, this is just him introducing things. Right, so this is the first interesting figure. We have announced over £280 billion of support protecting jobs, keeping businesses afloat, and helping families get by. What form does this actually come is what I want to know. So if we just keep scrolling.
I think that's referring to what they've done so far.
Okay, what they've done so far.
Yeah, this isn't the £280 billion budget of new measures. Trust me. Not in the way we're thinking, anyway.
Yeah. So. Yeah, you're right. So it's just going over the stats. So how many people have been unemployed? So all the key stats, 100,000 people. If we just keep going down to what he believes is the best way forwards. Three-part plan, blah, 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 blah. Let's scroll down. The NHS. Oh, actually, I don't know if he mentions it in this. Maybe he'll mention it. But I saw there was quite a bit of controversy about the increase in wages for NHS staff by like 1%.
Yes, there was a 1% rise. I think he will come to it, but he won't frame it in the way that most people have. So yeah, we know about the NHS with 20 million people being vaccinated. If we go further, this is an important point. OBR now expect the economy to return to its pre-COVID level by the middle of next year. So that's 6 months than previously thought. That's of course assuming there's going to be no, what are we, third wave now? No, fourth wave or fifth? Who knows?
Yeah,
or sixth. Yeah. So okay. So let's look at the figures here. So in the 5 years, so the economy expects that V-shaped recovery that we're expecting, roughly anyway. If you think about how long the COVID's last, it's been about a year. Between now and middle of next year, it's just over a year, isn't it? So it's about the same. It's roughly a V-shaped recovery. So he says that the OBR forecasts our economy grow by 4% this year, 7.3% in 2022, and then 1.76 and 1.7 in the following 3 years after that.
Okay.
Blimey.
Quite a bit to digest.
Yes, 4% this year, considering that the first 3 months this year are going to almost certainly show a contraction this first quarter, without a doubt. That's still going to be quite an impressive growth rate. I mean, put that in perspective, this was a normal year and the UK got 4% of growth. I think that'd be the highest it's recorded in post-war, certainly. I mean, the average around the sort of like 50s, 60s was around the 2% mark. Even in the 80s, 90s, 2% was considered boom. 4% would be ridiculous. But obviously, this is all catch-up recovery, as seen by an even bigger figure in 2022.
Yeah.
And then that figure stabilizes around what we would expect to be a reasonably healthy growth rate in the next 3 years. What does he else mention? Unemployment to peak at 11.9% they expected, but because of their interventions, apparently it's going to peak at 6.5% instead. 6.5% to put that in perspective isn't really that high. It's still below what it was, in the Great Financial Crash.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's nowhere near the Nauru in
no,
greater terms.
it's still too high. But it's not. It's not really worrying.
No, I mean, and also over time you can always reduce that figure back towards the Nauru. Even just naturally, I think as the economy recovers, we will see that unemployment figure reduce.
Yeah.
As he carries on here, he keeps on about losing jobs as a tragedy, which obviously it is. For employees, there will be no change to term. They will continue to receive. Okay, so this is the extension of.
Here we go. This is the first announcement. Here we go. We're finally through the announcements.
Yeah. Furlough scheme.
So, no change to the furlough scheme until September. That's no surprise. And then the contributions. This is the only thing I don't understand about this policy. Yeah. Of course, the idea that it's going to extend to September, a lot of people are saying that's going to indicate that actually the government have got plans to reverse lockdown once again, just in case another peak comes along. That's not necessarily the case. Remember, businesses, just because lockdown's over doesn't necessarily mean everything will just open back up all of a sudden. Everyone will be back in work. There'll need to be some months for businesses to maybe balance their books again, to then take on them staff, to be able to afford them to take back on them furloughed staff. So that explains that. And I actually think they're going to have to extend that further, even if there was no further big wave, which is unlikely. But
yeah.
I also get the idea that they've asked for 10% in August and 20% in September, but then suddenly it's just going to end after that. Jumping from 20% of wages to all of them over in the space of a month or two isn't really that much time, but it's just a point.
Yeah, I mean, also just to add to your point there about, obviously, as you said, it would take time for employers to get their sort of normal volume of staff back in. Also, I think it will take, I don't have any data on this, but it will probably take quite a bit of time for maybe even for consumers to find their feet, to re-evaluate their normal spending habits, because maybe those have been disturbed because of COVID. Obviously, you would expect some sort of spending splurge after lockdown in some sectors. But I think to see the sort of recovery back to what we consider the norm in consumer habits, that might take a little bit of time. So maybe that's the thinking there behind that extension. I also agree. Yeah, it seems like quite a sudden drop in the contribution. I would have expected maybe a sort of more gradual decrease. And maybe you're right. There will be some sort of extension to the furlough, so you will see that more gradual decrease over time instead of this sudden drop. Which could sort of hit businesses quite a lot.
Yeah. So, second, support for the self-employed will also continue until September. And then a fourth grant covering the period from February to April, and then fifth and final from May till the end of September, I assume. 80% of trading profits, that's nothing new, that's just what we expected. Access to the self-employment scheme is going to increase, yeah. Okay, here we go, next one. To support low-income households, the universal credit uplift of £20 a week will continue for 6 further months. So this was something they did way back last year in lockdown when they decided to increase universal credit by around £20 a week for everyone. That's going to continue. That's fair enough. The people, remember what we said is that often in recessions, it's people on fixed incomes who are often hit the most.
Yeah.
Which doesn't always make sense because yes, some people lose their job, but people who are on welfare, such as benefits or pensions, their incomes are normally quite fixed rate, set to a rate of inflation. So there's a lag there, and so they can actually suffer in real terms. So that's good. That's good. That's something that we've all agreed on. I don't think it should be higher, but
Yeah, the only counterpoint I'd say to that, you talked about obviously people on fixed incomes being hurt quite a lot. I would maybe argue, and again, I don't know the data on this, but maybe people with sort of that are self-employed with variable income jobs. Or variable income roles, so maybe they would be more reliant on this sort of universal credit because if you're a painter, for example, you're not going to have quite as much demand for your goods. So maybe this universal credit would be more useful.
they've been helped by this self-employment grant, haven't they? The
Mm.
majority that have been in business for long enough. Anyway, yeah, you're right. People self-employed also seem to be really hurt quite badly. But technically, normally their shocks are only temporary, whereas people on long-term fixed incomes like pensions, unless they've got other source of income, they tend to experience the longer-term effects.
Yeah.
So increased national living wage. Here we go.
Ooh.
I like how they've rebranded now from the minimum wage to the national living wage.
Okay, this
Even
is
though
spicy.
it says at £8.91.
Okay.
Annualizes £350 a year. Okay, that's not so bad, but I'm pretty sure I remember they said 2 years ago the national living wage should have been about £10 an hour to account for living costs as a bare necessity, and that was outside of London.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, also, I think Labour proposed 10. Was it £10 or was it £15? I can't
Yeah,
remember.
£10 an hour.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they have a lot of stuff they need to be spending on, so maybe this shouldn't come up quite as much as a surprise that they haven't increased it to £10 an hour. But yeah, it does seem. But yeah, it does seem a little bit odd that they've only increased it to £8.91. And as you said, yeah, the living costs in somewhere like London, like this £8.91 is not going to go very far in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, this will only affect people on that lower wage. I mean, yes, people on I think it's £8.21 an hour will experience a 70p rise a week, but then people on £9 an hour probably aren't going to see an increase in their wage at all.
No.
Which is the problem with a minimum price. So yeah, people on the borderline experience the bigger benefits, but then relative people just above it don't experience anything at all. If anything, net terms, they actually probably experience a loss. But yeah.
No, this is a good point. Like, although obviously there are roles where people are paid the minimum wage or the national living wage, I'd say that maybe the vast majority of people sort of exist on a sort of wage level just above that. So this probably won't affect quite as many people as maybe the government anticipates. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens in that regard.
Yeah, it depends if real wages keep up or not. If not, then we're going to see more and more people falling down to that line as it gets pushed up even further. See, so there's always a Kickstart program funding high quality jobs for over 250,000 young people. So we spoke about youth unemployment, haven't we, a few times? And this is aimed to deal with that. Giving every adult the opportunity for a fully funded level 3 qualification. This is a good idea.
It's very good. Very good idea.
Human capital there, we can see the benefits there. Particularly people who are structurally unemployed. That's going to help a lot.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm actually quite a big supporter of giving young people more tools and more skills, to, be able to facilitate them getting a job. So I think this is a step in the right direction. A fully funded level 3 qualification. It's obviously not quite, uni level, but it's a start. It's a start in the right direction to getting people the skills they need.
Every adult, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
This is every adult. So it's quite good.
Yeah, so obviously people maybe that have been, as you said, structurally employed, people maybe that have worked in the mines in the past or, in other secondary sector roles, they can be retrained and, reapplied somewhere else within the economy. So they're, contributing and mentally happier because they're doing something as well.
Yeah. So now he's talking about some spending in his spending reviews, talking about the extra 19 mil on top of the 125 for domestic violence programs, reduce risk of reoffending. That's all good. Oh wow, 10 million to support army veterans with mental health needs. That's going to help, isn't it?
I don't know the number of veterans, so I don't know quite honestly how far £10 million.
Well, I mean, considering it's been given £79 million to fund the whole of the new injection is £79 million for youth mental health. Yeah. We'll reserve thought on that one, maybe.
Yeah, maybe till we have the figures, because quite honestly, I don't know how far that figure will go. So
yeah. So the restart grants are carrying on. So £6,000 per premises, up to £18,000 for hospitality and leisure businesses. That's good. So £25 billion worth of grants in total. We'll take over.
Yeah. Making available 700 million support on. Okay, so this is an interesting point. Increasing, or they're making available. So obviously, maybe they could be taking this away from other government branches, but they're making available 700 million support, basically the culture sector. which was rather badly hit, not only by COVID but also by the austerity measures imposed by the Conservative government. So maybe
So
this is
your austerity measures.
yeah. But yeah, no, it's an interesting idea. I mean, obviously, one could make an argument economically that arts, culture, and sporting institutions don't directly, um, produce anything. They don't directly contribute to the productivity of an economy. I mean, obviously, there's an argument otherwise that, besides the fact that they provide jobs and give people different skill sets that can be useful in then getting jobs not only here domestically but abroad, makes sort of the workforce more competitive. And obviously, it's always good to invest in sporting institutions because, again, you could argue you're investing in your human capital there because if you're investing at youth level, especially, then you're sort of making people have a healthier life, and that also will extend their working life in the future. So these are all things you have to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go a bit further down. So there we go, 6 billion tax cut for businesses, which is interesting because that's not what he's saying about corporation tax.
Yeah, okay, that's quite interesting because I'm just thinking if we can scroll down and find it. A 6 billion. Okay, this might be an interesting point of discussion because I think they're talking about as you said, increasing the corporation tax to, I can't remember the figure on the top of my head. Maybe you know better.
What's this? Sorry.
The corporation tax, what they're increasing it to.
Ooh. I've seen a few figures being floated around. I know certainly the tax bands for income tax are being essentially held.
Yeah.
They've been frozen for the next 5 years, which will result is essentially like a form of tax increase because obviously real incomes will rise.
Yeah.
Push people up into higher bands. That's a good point. I don't know what the actual rate is they're going to set. Should we have a look?
Yeah, I'm just
So,
quick look.
it looks like it's rising to 25%. That was a figure I had in my head.
Ooh.
Okay, this is quite a big rise from 19% to 25% in the next 2 years.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's have a look at this from an economic perspective. I think this will be the big one we sort of talk about, a tax increase, because I think there's a lot to digest here. And I think what we'll do is we'll spend most of the podcast talking about the tax increase, because I think obviously all these other figures are important. Yeah, no, but yeah, I do. Well, I don't obviously like tax, but I think it's important to be able to analyse what a tax does, not only at A level, but also.
You heard it here, ladies and gentlemen. I don't like tax.
Well, doesn't anyone? Nobody likes tax.
What does that tell you?
So, obviously, the obvious argument for increasing corporation tax is you are increasing tax revenues for the government so they can spend more on other sectors. Or even they're talking about a £6 billion tax cut. I don't know what form that would come in. I don't know, maybe like decreasing the tax on, I don't know, is there a tax on financial transactions?
It's on business rates, so that's not corporation tax. That will be on like shops, for example, paying based on the size of their property or how big their shop is. It's a very flawed business rate. It's always been a very flawed. That's the idea. Business rates are falling, not corporation tax. They're very different.
Yeah, and also I don't think a £6 billion tax cut in whatever form it comes will compensate for the increase in corporation tax of 6%, which, by itself doesn't sound like a huge figure. It's 6%, but you have to remember this is billions and billions of pounds that they're attempting to raise here, and obviously we've already mentioned this can increase your revenue. In the short run, and maybe it's only a short run thing, so maybe in a few years' time they'll think about reducing it again, because obviously it makes because obviously it makes your economy less competitive for foreign investment, for foreign companies to come over, because they see that the fact they have to pay this corporation tax, and they're obviously not so keen, or for startups or any sort of firm to operate in an economy if the corporation tax is a very high rate. I think the average for most of the G7 is around 23-24%. I think most of the countries.
Yeah, historically the UK has been lower, particularly G7, G8, but also Europe. Some countries in Europe charge 28% plus. So, it's just moving it more in line. And unfortunately, that's harming. One of the main things that Britain's always cited for in World Economic Reports that compare. They almost have economic league tables, and although the UK has many issues, labour market flexibility and all the rest of it. move on to that another time. But also, the one main problem is one main good thing is the ability to attract overseas investment has always been good. It's always kept the UK current account deficit almost checked in the other account. It's always we've always attracted a lot of foreign investment, and this sort of tax, which is a tax on big business profit, that's exactly what corporation tax is going to reverse that. So perhaps we're cutting away at the UK's one big distinct sort of unique selling point that other countries in Europe and in the West don't have. So that is a yes. But unfortunately, this is what happens when you have such a big budget deficit, that you have to make the money up somewhere.
Yeah, and I think increasing, personal income tax would be political suicide for any government.
Oh yeah, they've never touched it. The worst they can ever do to that is freeze the brackets, which they have done. Which, as I've said before, doesn't sound like a tax increase in itself. It isn't. But if you think about it, because obviously in that time, inflation is going to mean that the value of money decreases slightly. So as wages rise, more people will be pushed up into other boundaries. So in real terms, it will result in a higher, more increase in revenue for government. Sorry. So
yeah,
bear that in mind. It's just a subtle way of tax rises, really, that doesn't avoid actually the base rate.
Yeah, and also actually this reminds me quickly as we talk about corporation tax. I think what I might do is release a sort of alongside video for this, maybe talking about the Laffer curve, which is sort of describes the relationship between the tax revenue and your tax rate. I probably should have actually made a graph before we started this podcast, but what I'll do is I'll release a video alongside this, sort of explaining that and what I mean talking about increasing tax revenues, and whether actually increasing corporation tax by a certain extent would actually yield a higher tax revenue, because I think that's quite a fundamental concept to wrap one's head around.
Yeah, the basic idea is that yes, you're increasing the tax rate, but you may not actually increase your total overall revenue past a certain point because of adverse effects on things like opportunity costs for businesses. What's the point in working harder if you end up just paying more tax anyway? Maybe it makes sense to actually reduce output, or perhaps not even pay tax, even though that doesn't really happen in Western economies. But it's just a consideration to make. Anyway, let's move on. What else have we got here? Oh, we have so not mentioned directly in the speech. It will be further down, but I mentioned the article is this new deposit. Well, not new. It has been used before, but this idea of these low deposit guarantees that the government has brought out. So if you remember, Help to Buy was essentially like a financing scheme for people with low deposits, so like 5-10%. It would enable them to buy their first home. Again, what this does is essentially, rather than providing some sort of direct financial support, it lowers the threshold for government backing. So you require just a deposit of just 5% now, and essentially what that means is you pay 5% on the house, and then you pay your mortgage straight after. And this is better for banks and people who hold the actual houses as collateral in case people don't pay their mortgage to default, because it's government backed. That increases the value of the collateral because governments aren't likely to default on debt. So if they do default, the government will guarantee that money. So that's essentially what this does here, and these will be available from next month. So that's good. That's going to support home ownership, because housing has been a bit weird the last year. It had a real rocket, didn't it, over the summer? I remember house prices started to really climb when you wouldn't have expected them to. Certainly not when you look at the rest of the economy, and they have now perhaps maybe they are falling under threat slightly now, particularly with negative equity and things like that. But that's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I'd just like to say, talking about governments defaulting, I think Greece has entered the chat there.
Yeah, they always do.
Yeah. But
Greece and most of America.
Yeah. But you make a very, very good point about how this is good for banks, and obviously, as you said, with some very rare exceptions, governments are unlikely to fail and not provide the cash. So banks will be happy about this. I guess consumers will be happy about this because they'll be more able to buy a home. So I think it's a win-win for everyone. I think this is a policy is a winner. I can't see anything in the short run, at least, that would sort of stop this from being a success.
What else we got? This is something I didn't understand. That there's not been a lot of movement on sort of climate change and green energy and things like that. There's not been a lot of that here. The only thing I can see that's prominent is this new, what they're calling a green bond. It's like a savings and investment bond, which you can pay into, and it will be used for green purposes, I guess. But they haven't actually released any detailed rate that they're going to pay out on it. So if they're going to pay a very, which, given the state of the economy and the base rate, it almost certainly will be. I don't really see that being highly effective. If anything, at the moment, what you want to be doing is getting people not buying government bonds. You want to be getting them out, buying other securities, surely, and goods, rather than storing the money in government bonds, which locks them away for 10 years. But that's just an aside, I guess.
Yeah, it does seem rather counterintuitive that they want people invested in government bonds and not in the private sector, because I think maybe we talked about this before in another podcast about the crowding out effect. Obviously, if you have people investing in the government bonds and not in the private sector, the government sort of has a crowding out effect there of the private sector. And in the long run, you don't really want this. You want a private sector that's thriving and an economy that's less reliant on the public sector, essentially.
Yeah. But we'll wait and see about that one.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned, I don't know if you just mentioned it now, but the green, what was it? The green investment thingy. I don't know.
The green bonds, they call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be what? So that would be invested in like renewable or green energy and shit, right?
Yeah, I think it's being done by the National Savings and Investments sort of like organisation. They're like the government-backed board that run them bonds. So I think it's specifically being used to raise money for environmental projects.
Okay.
Which is interesting, but I don't see it being like a war bond and generating that sort of revenue.
No.
If anything, rather than, I get why they're doing it. That shows in at least an intent to invest in more environmentally friendly policies. But yeah, I get with COVID, obviously, the way that the environment and climate change and the climate emergency now has been pushed back down the queue, even though really it shouldn't have been pushed at all. I guess it's just the demands of the day. What we really see now is actually, I argued, I think, ages ago that we use this as a time to use this as what's like a green recovery. This is now the perfect point with demand perhaps so below trend output level. Maybe this is a good time to use stimulus, but in a green way, to not only bring that level of AD back into where it should be, but also to revolutionise and change the fundamentals of the economy forever. But that's another aside, really.
Well, yeah. Just to sort of expand on your point now, I mean, I think there was a lot of surprise amongst a lot of people that they didn't increase the fuel duty tax.
Yes, fuel duty has again been freeze.
And as you said, it was a good I mean, obviously, I can understand why.
In this climate, increasing fuel duty is not going to be a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, for the here and now, it would not help businesses at all. And I think you'd have quite a lot of complaints from those private sector firms. But in the long run, maybe that would make people more, willing to have a look at alternative methods of energy. And I think maybe the government's missed a trick here, and invest, maybe making a bigger pledge to invest in green energy. But we'll have to see, I think, on that one. I think it's difficult to say, and also because they're spending the money on so many other different areas, this wasn't the budget for it. Maybe they'd have to wait a couple of years to see how the economy is doing until everything stabilises, and then see whether they have the funds to sort of have a war chest to invest in this particular area.
A war chest? You haven't heard that for a while, have you? I mean,
No.
they call it a war chest. I mean, I honestly would like to know what all this money is being spent on, because I can see some parts, but they're quoting budget deficits here of 200-300 billion for several years, and the cost to in some places, furlough is around 40-50 plus now. All these government-backed loans and things, but it does seem like a lot of it is being spent on waste. I mean, a lot of these contracts, NHS Track and Trace was a complete waste of money in its first year, really. A lot of these contracts were overinflated. They were rushed. Obviously, you can understand why they were rushed. No one disagrees on that, but they were often given to companies that didn't have the ability to perform in the first place. And so, I mean, some of that money is going to be looked back and saying, well, hold on a minute, you probably got and wasted a good 50-60 billion there on something that didn't need to be, So that budget deficit is, of course, astronomically high. That's nothing like we've seen in peacetime, but it does seem even drastic for that level.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think having a look at the data, borrowed a record 355 billion, which is insane in real terms and on paper. And yeah, and you're completely right in saying that it's the highest level of borrowing since the Second World War. I mean, obviously, it's probably the single biggest crisis since then that I can think of. Maybe economically outside of the crisis, the fuel crisis, the oil crisis we had in the 70s. That's the only thing I can think, comparably speaking, that even comes close. But even then, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It'll be difficult to reduce this deficit in the long run. Maybe you can erode it with growth. That's one method of reducing a government deficit besides making cuts. But obviously, that's easier said than done.
Yeah. And then the final point we were sort of like alluding to that we're going to discuss is this NHS Pay Rise that I've been just doing a bit of reading whilst we've been talking. So from what I can make out, this is a pay rise in nominal terms. So this is not a real increase in 1%. This is literally just a 1% increase in pay. And this is for nursing staff and NHS staff in general, I think. I think this is just, this is for all health staff as far as I'm aware. And apparently this is the most that the government can afford, which, okay, with that budget deficit, it might not actually be lying. But even so, it does seem a bit off. A bit is actually an understatement. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? Even though I defended the increase in culture spending, I do honestly think that's a good thing. Maybe some of that money could have been transferred over to increasing NHS staff, because not just talking from an economic perspective, but just from a moral perspective as well, they definitely deserve a lot more than 1%. And a clap every Thursday night. But they've done tremendous work. So.
Yes, I mean I'm just looking here. The Royal College of Nursing, the ones who are mostly leading this strike action, the College of Nurses, the union there, they are calling for a 12.5% pay increase for nurses compared to a 1%. So okay, you can sort of see. I mean, I mean, we're not experts on this, but normally trade unions, not necessarily trade unions, organisations like this will always call for much higher pay rise. They know they'll get just as like a bargaining tactic, but 12.5% even for COVID does seem high.
Yeah.
Realistically, as much as it would be nice, a one-off bonus of that would certainly be a good idea. I would agree with that. But yeah, the 1% pay rise is completely ridiculous. Given inflation's at 0.9% at the moment, and it's predicted to rise, they reckon, about 1.5%. The 1% pay rise would result in a real terms pay cut, and the government knows it.
Yeah.
They're actually making a cut there in real terms. That's one thing to think about as well. The government may announce an increase in real terms in its spending, but of course its income also rises in nominally as well because of the effect of inflation. So if they're actually making spending increases that are below the rate of inflation, they're actually in reality making real cuts.
Yeah. I mean,
because of course their income will rise by inflation, roughly.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, obviously there's an argument about how much power the trade unions have, but I would maybe expect this figure to increase to around 2.5%, maybe, realistically.
Yeah, I think 2 to 3% would be all right. And I would also call for a bonus, a one-off bonus to be done instead of the 12.5% pay increase like that. That would seem a bit for us.
I don't think even a 12.5% one-off bonus would be really. I'd agree with having a one-off bonus of some degree.
Maybe like 5%, 10%. Yeah, there's no necessary figure. What I'm saying is there should be an above inflation rate of increase, and I agree with that certainly. And then a one-off small bonus as well. That of course doesn't say that money makes up for it, but it's just a show of appreciation. The only problem I can see with that is then of course you open up the door to other key workers as well. Okay, you might say yes. I admit nurses and helping staff are, of course, right at the front line. They're literally saving people's lives. But then there are other key workers in retail, in public transport, public service, anywhere who are just keeping the country going, who also are key workers and have done extraordinary lengths as well. So you have the whole public sector calling for pay increases, and then, it just becomes unsustainable for the government. You see like a 70 bin strikes, and they are threatening industrial action. And in this climate, that is the last thing the NHS, having entered the latter phase of the flu season now with COVID and industrial action, could kill the NHS.
Yeah, I think obviously it gives the trade unions a great position of power. But yeah, I mean, from a practical perspective, you don't want this massive strike. And yeah, that's actually a really good point, actually, right? If you have a higher increase in wages, then you would have other public sector organisations, trade unions demanding higher wages, you know, whether that be for the teachers or, as you said, for other key workers. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
the government, even though I disagree with such a low increase, I can see why the government's done it from a practical perspective, even
yeah,
though
they're trying to
morally
put
it's wrong.
yeah, I mean, to put this into perspective, they are saying that the multi-year pay deals they've agreed since the Cameron days have resulted in a rise of over 12% for newly qualified nurses.
Mm,
It's by about 8.2% over the last few years,
yeah.
which is a decent amount. No one's denying that. But bear in mind that last year they froze almost all public sector pay except NHS staff. So if you can imagine what this is NHS staff who have had them small pay increases, imagine what the backlash could be if they granted this to other public sector workers who haven't had a pay increase at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd imagine it would be monumental, the backlash you'd see there, and
Yeah.
maybe talking about wages and all that. Maybe that's for a topic for another day, since we have been running for about 35 minutes, so
Yeah,
we don't
we
want
will
this
call it
to.
a day, but it's budget day, so we can afford the time.
Mm, yeah, yeah. But obviously, we don't want to keep you guys, if you're still watching, for too long. So what we'll probably do is sort of wrap it up here. I think we sort of hit everything we wanted to hit, sort of topic wise. Unless there's anything you want to mention, Dan, before we sort of call an end to this.
Vote Monster Raving Loony Party.
Yeah.
Oh God, don't know. We get flagged for political. No, God, no.
Don't worry, I'll edit it out. Don't worry, I'm an editor. It's all good.
So vote. There you go.
Vote, yeah, vote blank. Insert party here. There we go.
Your opinion there.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. We don't. We're saving the political stuff for your own series whenever that comes out.
Oh, whatever. Could be a while yet, folks. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll announce it in the summer of 2042. So watch out for it.
Probably. We'll aim to in the first instance. We might have to go through several independent review boards and put it subject, to public planning and consultation, all the rest of it. Typical standard practice in Britain.
All the good stuff. But yes, Dan, thank you for joining me as always, giving your insight. And yeah, guys, if you have enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe for more content on the channel. I've been Dan. I've been Dan. I can't even do it.
You will not be me. Even worse if you said I would do. Jesus.
I haven't had enough coffee is my excuse. Yes, guys, please have a wonderful evening, slash afternoon, slash morning, whenever you're watching this. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one.
Happy Easter.